Well, Craig and Shara, you know, if there's one cardinal rule of journalism, it's that a reporter reports the story, doesn't become part of the story. But Hurricane Katrina broke a lot of rules, and it shattered that one. 10 years ago, I was personally, professionally, and literally immersed in the floodwaters of Katrina. And ironically, it was a Tulsa police officer who was one of the first people to help me pick up the pieces.
Good morning, guys. How you doing?
I recognize this fella.
Yes,
Good to
sir.
see you again, man.
Doing well yourself?
Well, we're both a little grayer now, but hey, this was 10 years ago.
You know what's funny? I did it in rubber boots. Yeah, I remember wearing a rubber boot trying to kick that thing in.
In September 2005, Sergeant Sean Larkin worked in Tulsa, and I worked in New Orleans as the sports director at WDSU TV.
Next.
You doing it right now?
Mike, why are you in such a bad mood?
What do you care?
Good.
Okay. If you were 2-7, you'd be in a bad mood too. What next?
We were all in a bad mood when Katrina struck. 3 weeks after it roared ashore on August 29, 2005, I was allowed to return for the first time to my house, located just a football field or two away from a huge breach in the London Avenue Canal.
I mean, everything. Every car, every tree, the grass, the bush, the houses. To me, it was like walking around in a black and white picture. I mean, nothing had color. Everything was just that gray, muddy color.
And the smell.
The smell was horrendous. The smell was horrendous, yes.
All you can say is thank God you got the kids out. Thank God they weren't up in the attic here.
Sean and I met for the first time that day. Back then, he was a member of Tulsa SWAT team. He'd been hired by my station to provide security for reporters venturing out into what was largely a lawless, out-of-control city.
The whole situation was so surreal. Obviously, the damage, the water, and seeing people walk around with rifles on their back, it looked like something from another country where almost, like, like a war was going on.
As bad as it was, there were lighter moments.
Oprah Winfrey, I remember, was there, and her limousine was parked up there. It was so hot that their driver was letting us rotate and take naps inside of her limousine.
From limousines to walking through a dark, moldy house that had sat in 7 feet of rancid, toxic water for almost a month.
Claire's favorite pen stuck to the wall.
Watching you guys have to look at, you know, what was your house or your belongings or things that, you know, or that you as a family man cherished that were important to your family. It's heartbreaking. I mean, it's terrible seeing that for you guys.
That's the last I saw of Sean for several years. In 2007, I moved to Tulsa at 6 in the morning. One evening, a fellow walks up to me in a restaurant and says, "Hey, I'm the guy who busted down your door." Small world, isn't it?
Listen, we know what's going on these streets. I mean, everybody's blasting at each other.
The 18-year veteran is now a supervisor in TPD's operational drug unit.
I like to think we go after the worst of the worst, and that's why, you know, I essentially became a policeman. I want to put bad guys in prison.
A decade ago, he was protecting me from the bad guys. He thought he'd only be in New Orleans a few days. It turned out to be 22 days.
To actually see it firsthand, I mean, was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. You know, watching it on television or even now seeing stuff on TV about it, it doesn't do any justice.
Well, I'll tell you what, trust me, I'm glad it was just once in a lifetime. Once was plenty for me. I want to thank Sean for that. And if you get up bright and early, set the DVR, I'll be back here for 6 in the morning tomorrow morning to tell you more stories of Tulsans who came down here, raised their hand, said, I'll volunteer, I'll go to help out. And we're also tomorrow morning going to be talking about this beautiful building behind me. Of course, it symbolized the tragedy of Katrina 10 years ago. Now it is rebuilt. We got a chance to go inside and talk with the man who was in charge of that building on the night that Hurricane Katrina struck. It's quite a story. We'll be sharing that with you tomorrow morning. Back to you folks.
It is something to see. I mean, this was a natural disaster as well as a man-made disaster.
And there's still a lot of discussion about that even 10 years later, right, Rich?
Well, I'll tell you what, Craig, that discussion's been had in court by now. You know, a lot of people refer to this as the most expensive natural disaster in United States history, $141 billion and counting. But it was proven in court that, of course, maybe most of that money was spent repairing damage caused by the failed federal levee system. It wasn't just Mother Nature who took out New Orleans and the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, but here in New Orleans specifically, the failed levees led to a lot of the damage, including what you saw inside of my house 10 years ago.